Well, hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And here in Maryland, it's 8 o'clock in the evening on a Tuesday evening, and very nice to have a chance to relax a little bit with Diane Sare after a tremendous run for U.S. Senate in the state of New York against Chuck Schumer and somebody else whose name I forget. And and now, without taking a moment's breath, you jumped right into your newest campaign, and that again is for the Senate in New York. This time against Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, if I've said that right. And I'm just delighted to have the opportunity to hear some more from you. And how did the campaign go? But more or less, more importantly, what gives you the energy and the vitality to jump right into another campaign after that big effort?
Well, I guess, as LaRouche once said, I thrive on stress. Maybe that's it. Um, and we're in a terrible crisis. Plus, I was somewhat inspired by how much they didn't want me to run. From the signature requirements to the exclusion from the debate to the taking away 30,000 votes in public on television. At the end of the campaign, it was very clear that the idea was to discourage me, and therefore it seems that I had a devastating impact against certain very rotten policymakers. So I thought that it would be a good thing to continue and press the point.
Well, I am so impressed, and I do appreciate what you said about losing 30,000 votes on TV. I didn't see the event, but I was following the reports of that, and it strikes me as the type of attack that is meant to seem illogical. In other words, you could have understood it if maybe gradually they took it down, or maybe uh, you know the fact is, it didn't make a bit of difference in the race. So why did they do it anyway? Other than to send a time of a chilling message to you that, hey, we're in control of the numbers. We're in control of the numbers. There's nothing you can do about it. And we also control the media, so you can complain about it, but that'll just make you look like another, grousing, failed politician. And so that they set this trap for you. But the main part of it is that they're trying to psychologically discourage you from fighting back by sending this signal of, hey, we're just going to throw illogical, attacks bombs at you and at random, and so you have no control over anything, and we're going to wear you down. Well, you're not going to be worn down, and that's exciting. It's also taking on a lot more burden than most people, I think, feel like they can do. So again, we owe you a lot of thanks.
Well, thank you. I think we're really in a terrible crisis, and the reports from the ground in Ukraine, including from the Ukrainian military in Bakhmut, where they're talking about trench warfare, which sounds like World War One. People in a foot of water, and it's 36 degrees, and they're standing on top of corpses, and uh, it's just horrific.
It
And
is.
the evil of the policymakers in the United States, including emphatically Schumer, who I believe is the main person pushing this. Well, there's many of them, but the $34 billion package to continue arming Ukraine, which is now part of the defense authorization bill. And this is after Ukraine has shot missiles deep into Russia. So, do we really want to do this? These two attacks, I guess, on the airports, uh, it's really insane, and it's very cruel. You know that Ukraine is like a Nazi dictatorship. So if anyone is even suspected of receiving a package of food from the Russians, they might be shot in the back of the head. So I think of the terror for people there who are not Nazis, but who are trapped, can't get out, Um, and the Russians have been put in a situation where it seems, from their perspective, they have no choice because Boris Johnson, when he flew over to stop Zelensky from negotiating in April, and Biden, frankly, making these comments that the only way we can negotiate is if Russia gives up everything, including Crimea, there doesn't seem to be an interest in negotiations from the West. So in that circumstance, what do you do? There's no way to end this without the complete obliteration of Ukraine. And I don't think NATO and the UK and the US intend to allow that. So I think we're in an extremely dangerous conjuncture, and I hope some people come to their senses.
Yeah, most people are not, though. Most people are still thinking in terms of Ukraine was this innocent, country that was just minding its own business, and then Putin, with his insatiable desire for grabbing territory and taking things from other people, launched this unprovoked attack and has now invaded the poor, country of Ukraine that really should be a part of Europe, and we owe it to them to fight this evil Putin. And I people buy it. I was talking with a good friend of mine just today, and I just can't get anywhere. There's no way to get past you know it's like the Cold War again. It's like the Putin is the communist dictator of the 50s is now Putin of 2022, and the media is controlled. You probably can testify to that with great veracity. So where do we go other than you and I talking here with a couple dozen good people, and we're glad to have each of you here, by the way, to try to just keep the flame alive. But what else? What does your campaign look like right now in terms of your
Well,
organization?
my campaign, I'm planning a major event on January 8th in New York City, which will be hybrid, in person, and then anyone who can't be there in person will be also on Zoom. And in a way, it's a launch of my campaign, but it's also a policy discussion. Some of my um, former military friends, I think, will be participating. They don't typically endorse candidates, so it's not for endorsement, but to say, hey, someone's going to define a policy direction for the United States, outline the dangers. And that's really why I'm running. Although this race, I have some different ideas because we're going to have to make a kind of political sea change in this country. And perhaps people around my campaign and around the nation should consider what it would take for me to actually win this Senate seat, because that's what we need to do. I mean, we need to turn over the whole chessboard. The other thing, I was really pleased, and you've probably seen them, by what Helga presented on what I'm getting all my conferences mixed up, but the 10 principles, I guess it was at the November 22nd conference on the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. And she put forward a discussion paper, really. It's not doctrinaire, but a document, 10 principles of a new international security and development architecture. And I think this is critical because I had an experience this past week. On Friday, one of my guests on my symposium, who was supposed to be talking about drug money laundering, I always give a strategic briefing, so I'd said something about the situation in Ukraine, and then he felt obligated to tell me that Putin was losing, Ukraine was going to mop him up, this was an out. I mean, just so I thought, when you're dealing with someone like this, who, if they persist in enforcing that viewpoint, we're heading toward nuclear war, perhaps we can't win a debate, and we should give up trying to win the debate. And we should just say, look, we need to figure out a way that nations can coexist peacefully. And there are certain principles of sovereignty, of the right to economic development. What's your conception of man? Is it so much worth it to you that to prove that Putin is Hitler, that you're prepared to risk annihilation of every single person on the planet? Maybe you should think a little bit differently. And I think this must be something like what happened at the end of the 30 Years religious war. Helga was making the point that there were negotiations going on for 4 years to come up with the Treaty of Westphalia, because people realized that they could not continue this way. And if you kept saying, well, we have to get revenge, we have to have retribution, well, so and so, and believe me, anyone thinks that the crimes being committed today are worse than during the religious war. Ugh. Once you get into these religious wars, that's pretty scary stuff, torture and all kinds of hideous crimes. But they said, okay, if we continue and say that we have to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and you will be having war for the next million years until you just simply wipe yourself out. So they drew a line and they said, okay, we're not looking back, no more retribution. We will each act in the interest of the other. There was a whole economic package of debt forgiveness. And people today, I think, would tend to say, well, that's impossible. You can never do it. Well, if that's impossible, then kiss your rear end goodbye. We're going to have to figure out how to move in that kind of direction.
Well, if I may, just my own reaction to that is I'm much more concerned about being enslaved than I am incinerated.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more likely that they're building a totalitarian, technological empire that through use of things like they've been developing through MK Ultra and otherwise to put us in a kind of a Borg-like mentality where we have to resistance is futile and you will do what you're told.
Well, we're sort of already in that, I think.
Yeah, we are. That's where I think that this really could be, even worse than just disappearing from, from would be to be a slave of those Middle Ages or any of the earlier, a Roman slave. My God, what a horrible fate that would be. Or say you're strapped to a bench in a Venetian galley, rowing up and down the Adriatic until you die. These things went on for real, and that is a possible way that they're taking this, because I see these elite people that can just disobey all the rules. Hunter Biden or whoever you want to. I don't care which side you're on. There's somebody on every side that just gets away with everything. And the rest of us, we get busted for some little bitty thing, and it ruins your whole career. They're definitely
busted for telling the truth. That's what you get busted for. You get busted for doing good, and doing evil gets rewarded. But I do think there is an object to this totalitarian dictatorship, which is also depopulation. So it's not just enslavement, it is death. I mean, if you think about the shutting down of energy, the shutting down of the food supply, it's the whole package. And a number of people have said, and I tend to think that there's some truth to the matter, that they're more afraid of chemical and biological warfare than they are of nuclear. I'm really eager to get my hands on more of what might be coming out in Geneva, or what the Russians are investigating in terms of the bioweapons labs in Ukraine. And also, I just read this extremely alarming paper about, here it is, this article on some of the things that they're working on. And this is a briefing from the eve of the 9th Bioweapons Conference review, which I think it's going on now. It started at the end of November and it goes through December 16th or something. And in this paper, it is claimed that Boston University just this past October, I guess, developed a synthetic coronavirus pathogen based on the Omicron strain, and that the modified virus actually killed 80% of the infected model animals. And they wanted to move these things into Ukraine or to Indonesia or other countries because of safety considerations, not doing it in the United States. But of course, once you unleash a virus or you have birds or other animals carrying it, all of which they were working on, it's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. You're unleashing a process that is not going to be under control.
Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that's also one of my big concerns, and I'm glad that other folks are looking at it. But politically, that's a kind of a difficult one to sell. Also, at least as I find, once again, to try to talk about biosafety labs and things like that. It's just most people are like, and it's so easy for everything to be labeled as Russian propaganda.
Right.
That's
Right. Well, that's why I think
you must have been watching RT, or something like that, and that's I don't hear that, but that's the way it is, really. Anything that doesn't fit the narrative, it must either be from RT, and if you say something really incisive and smart, then that makes you anti-Semitic.
Right. Well, Senator Gillibrand, when I confronted her at a town hall meeting on the Center for Countering Disinformation list, and the fact that that very day of her town hall meeting, a package had been sent to my campaign address, which is a P.O. box, thankfully, but it had something about Ukraine in the return address, and it rattled. And I told my treasurer who gets the mail, I said, would you please call the police? Because he knew I'm on the list, and he said, I definitely decided I would not bring the package into the office. But why should someone have to worry about that for expressing a point of view? And that the U.S. Congress is allocating money to silence, to violate the First Amendment of American citizens. It's pretty outrageous. Anyway, what Gillibrand said is, she said, "Oh no, that list isn't what you think it is. That's Russian disinformation."
Oh boy.
And she said, "And by the way, if you feel threatened, I mean, no one should feel threatened. You should really call the FBI."
Call the FBI. She said it with a straight face, I'm sure.
Yes. And she sent one of her aides over to help me find out how to call the FBI. I don't need to call the FBI. I'm sure they're right here somewhere, in the room and in the communication between us.
Oh man, that's funny, but that's also sad, and it's why we have to fight, because we just can't let that dystopian future descend upon us. And yeah, I agree with the depopulation as well, but I think in order to get us to be submissive enough that we will allow them to take grandma when she turns 65, they're going to be doing all of this psychological warfare, which they've been doing for quite some time, and we know about that, like the Soviets that were doing it to us. But I think probably we do it to ourselves now more than the Soviets ever did during the Cold War.
Well, I think this is why, and Lynn used to say over and over and over again, mankind is not an animal. Man is not an animal. And I thought, why is he saying this to us over and over? Well, because this flows from your conception of man. What Helga writes in here is this, which I love, the idea of the perfectibility of mankind. Because we are here in the flesh, we will never be perfect, but it doesn't mean you can't have a conception of perfection. And you know this from the music, right? If you think about, you're trying to learn a work by a great composer, you are never satisfied, no matter how well you perform it, no matter what you always have this kind of yearning that you never quite attained the conception of the piece that was in your mind, that the composer had transmitted to you. And that's really a beautiful thing, because if you have the idea that your entire life is dedicated to this pathway of perfection, that is really very optimistic. You have a whole different approach, a whole different view of human beings.
Just speaking to you and in the context of Helga and everyone associated with Schiller and LaRouche movements, I that just brings to mind the amazing performance of the violin concerto by Beethoven by Dr. Farrakhan.
Mm.
Uh, that I really, really was surprised and just delighted to see what a really confident, beautiful performance it was. And that kind of thing to me, I don't care what you think about Minister Farrakhan. I don't care if you like him, hate him, think he's, whatever, but the guy could play the violin and it played it beautifully. So can we not just stop with the war for a while and just accept the fact that this is a human being expressing a very sublime human performance?
Yeah, well, that's the point, and I shouldn't say I'm afraid. I think that that is now at this point the only way that we are going to resolve this crisis. That is, we have to fundamentally transform our identity if we're going to get out of this. We cannot solve the danger that we are in if we remain in the same domain of thinking and fixed behaviors. Because you're right, they have us caught. If we continue as we are, there's no way out.
That's right. And sitting in that galleys, we're rowing your life away. Uh, that's maybe 100 years ago. In some places, they were still doing that. I know they were still doing it in the 19th century. The galley slaves. And if you were unfortunate enough to get caught in in a battle or just get captured by some slave traders, you were screwed. And these commercial interests don't care. They don't think of humans as anything other than animals, and useful animals that can be put to work uh, until they're dead, and then get some more and put them to work until they're dead. That happened in the 20th century. It happened in the Nazis' death camps, and it happened all over the world in different situations that I can't enumerate. But it's not that far away. And uh, what's happening in Ukraine, as you described, with the trench warfare in the cold winter, is disgusting. And when I think that all this time, Russian oil has been flowing through Ukraine pursuant to commercial contracts, you know, that are going to be honored, and this is business as usual. Like I don't know if you know Charles Higgins' book, Business Trading with the Enemy,
Yeah.
about all the big oil companies doing all the business with IT&T and uh, all the collusion with Farben and Hamburg America and all of that story. We've studied it in depth here on my channel. Believe me, this business as usual is absolutely a killing machine. That's what's going on in Ukraine right now. Is that the business interests have just gotten to the point where it makes more sense for them to keep the war going than to not keep the war going. And so, as long as they're making money on it, they're going to still throwing the young men into the meat grinder on both sides, into the cannon fodder, and into those cold, nasty trenches where they're going to get sick and either die young or go home with a permanent illness. It's unbelievable that we let this stuff happen, but once again, it just shows the filthy philosophy, if you can call it that, of this empirical, this British Empire. Adam Smith. Nothing's worth anything unless you can weigh it on a scale or sell it for so much gold. And that is so inhuman, so horrible that
It's
we have,
also wrong, right? That's not true. That's not how the universe works.
right.
And that's the reason why we can still win this fight and mankind could come through this very much better, very much ennobled, but not if we sink to something lower than these principles. I was thinking, well, there's different cases. I mean, you can take the case of Joan of Arc. Think about that. The French army was getting creamed, and here's this girl, clearly, who somehow had a lot of instruction, um, but also was inspired. And she causes this army to become victorious. And not because she ordered people to do anything, but by her own actions, her own mission, her own inspiration, which transformed the battle scene and really created the conditions for the first republic, or the beginnings of a republic, in France. This, so where does that come from? Or another case I was thinking about, Frederick Douglass, which always amazes me because people can say that if you're brutalized and you suffer, then you just naturally have to be a bad person. Well, he certainly suffered a great deal, and he was not a bad person. He became heroic, and he observed people. Like, one of his insights, the mistress who helped him learn how to read, and her husband really came down on her like a ton of bricks for doing this, that this was, whatever, crime, etc. And so she made the decision to comply with her husband and not work with the young Frederick Douglass anymore. And he watched her become an absolutely hideous, nasty, cranky person, and concluded that the effect of slavery was actually more destructive to the slave owners than it was to the slaves, because because when you participate in degrading another human being, you are violating the nature of man. And when you participate in doing that, you destroy yourself. That's, for example, the Abu Ghraib, our torturing of people, doing these things. We are creating an illness in the United States, which has not gone away because we ordered our soldiers to do that. And not that many of them had the incredible moral fortitude and courage to stand up against it. People who did, like David Hale, I think he's still in prison, who objected to the drone warfare. But that's what it will take. And ultimately, as King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. You have to have a certain kind of faith that if you are upholding a true principle, that's how the universe is shaped, and that's going to resonate with a certain strength, which is more powerful than whatever hideous, ugly force these billionaires, the Great Reset crowd, can bring to bear on us.
Well, I would love to see, Joan of Arc come riding into Washington D.C. on a horse and take charge of things and straighten things out. Actually, that's probably the same mission that I've always pictured for Macduff since I started working with my father's story as a Macduff-like story where he cleans up the mess after the distortion and corruption of the kingdom. And that kind of a person that can just withstand all of the slings and arrows of fortune and still, stand up against the forces of darkness that are trying to pull us down, and the people that have just, and I see this right here, right now, where I live. I mean, what you said about people that deny the humanity and it hurts themselves. It does, but it also hurts the victims. And as you get older, it affects your health. So people that can take some abuse at 20. You can't do it at 60. You can't take that at 65. And but these people that don't care, they will toss that same attitude at a 65-year-old person as they will at a 20-year-old kid, just to express their own superiority. They're bullying, and that there's so much of that now in this culture. And I think that has been intentionally engendered in us through things like the wide variety. I mean, you know they didn't have to show us those pictures of Abu Ghraib,
Right.
but they did,
Right.
because they want us to get into this morally ambiguous state of we don't know what's right.
Well, they want to be
Our American
participant.
government did that. They trained our Lindy England, this kid from West Virginia, to do things like that. And Karpinski was running it, or whoever was running it. They went right along with this program and said, you shall now put all the Iraqis into a triangle without any underwear, and that kind of thing. They say, yes, okay, we'll do that, right? And check, okay, triangle, right? Take the picture, right? Wires on the bucket, got it. Take the picture. This is insanity, and they're showing it to Americans on television and saying, look what we did. And then we're not doing anything about it. Throw some scapegoats in jail. But that was from the top American policy, and the people that make that policy have never been held accountable.
Right. Well, that has to change. It has to change. A friend of mine was talking about Japan when they had their collapse, I guess, I'm not sure when, the 90s maybe. But he himself was a banker, and he said, I thought it was a little harsh at first that they were putting these bankers in jail. Wasn't enough that they went bankrupt. But then I realized you had to put them in jail. There had to be justice, because otherwise no one would ever trust again. And MacArthur, the same thing. Again, interestingly, Japan, because, well, two different cases. One, there were many people pressuring him to execute the emperor for war crimes, and he said, we cannot execute the emperor. People see the emperor as God. If you really want to have a revolt of an unmanageable situation, if you want to send 3 million American troops over here to put down a rebellion, he said, no, we can't do that. And he actually became quite a friend of the emperor in certain ways. But he said, we do have to actually prosecute people for war crimes. And there were some executions of people who committed hideous war crimes, because he said you have to establish a certain principle of justice. So I think look, after 2008, not one single banker went to jail. I mean, Bernie Madoff, he wasn't a big player. He wasn't an orchestrator of this. And when Eric Holder was confronted about it, he said, oh no, we couldn't prosecute them. That would be the end of the system. Right. That's the whole point. The system should end. They should be prosecuted.
Well, I do have to add one point about MacArthur and Japan, and the fact. Yes, I agree that in order to avoid chaos, or to avoid empowering the people and having to figure out some way to let them have a real democracy, the best thing to do for everybody was to leave the emperor. But that kept in place the power structure that had existed in the war in many cases. But what I really think has to be known and recognized is the Unit 731, the biological warfare unit of the Japanese, who were in fact taken into the United States and were given immunity from prosecution in exchange for their data. And that is another example of certain things being more important than human life, more important than sovereignty, more important than war. But because they had this unique data that we can't reproduce that data because we're not going to torture people. We're not going to throw, parasites out of planes into cities. So, but they did it. So they've got the data. So we're going to trade their freedom for their data. And that is one of the horrors of the Japan MacArthur story. I just think it's important, because I've been working a lot on things like biological warfare early. So I think it's important that we not gild the Japan MacArthur experience too much. It was war.
Right.
I'm not
So
judging. I'm just saying that we did do that.
Was that his idea or someone else that?
Oh, I probably Willoughby or one of the more fascist people that hung around with him. I think MacArthur was a good guy. I really do. But on the other hand, he had all kinds of connections, and his father, was General Arthur MacArthur of the Philippine American War. And what did they do but commit genocide? I mean, American troops were over there shooting down Filipinos like rabbits, and that is a sad thing that I read, and I believe that it's true because we were just, like the like the Griffith movie. People were just psychologically manipulated into thinking, okay, you guys are, sons of the Civil War generation in the South. What are they going to do with their lives? They've got this tradition of chivalry and the old South, and so they feed them all this propaganda about the glorious KKK and how that we are we're the good people, and we're wearing these white
Right.
because we're like saints. We're riding with justice, and that's how they get them to fight in World War I. And so they become these soldiers, and it's like this whole psychological manipulation of people through the media and culture that I just.
Well, that's why we're doing the Dona Nobis Pacem, because that's certainly a non-linear way to pop people out of their bestiality. So
Yeah,
far.
I've noticed that you guys have got groups singing Dona Nobis Pacem all around the world now. That's really fun.
Yes, and we're working to spread it further. But we have the Philippines and Germany and Denmark and Mexico so far, and all over the United States. Um, and even in Washington, D.C., by you. Did they invite you? You should go down and sing with them.
Oh, I have done a lot of performing in Washington. I don't know if you have Christmas revels. You do have Christmas revels in New York. It's a famous annual thing, and I've performed in the Washington Christmas revels many years. And so every show ends with singing Dona Nobis Pacem, and it's something very close to me too. I probably sang it in the '80s most of the shows at the Listener Auditorium. So yeah, I've done a lot of singing in Washington. Where we live now is about 50 miles south of Washington, so it's not so simple to just hop in the car and go like it used to be. But yeah, I love to get together with folks and sing. So let's do more of that.
That's it. I think that's critical.
Well, I don't have any need to go to a full hour show tonight. I think I've had a lot of fun talking to you, and I maybe we should talk a little bit about why, in particular, Kirsten Gillibrand needs to be taken on, so that because I don't really know a lot about her except for I hear her name now and then. Well, what is the big issue that you think you can bring forth to the people that why they shouldn't vote for her?
Well, she's bad. Putting it simply.
Maybe it's time to sing.
No, she's definitely part of this whole military industrial complex grouping. She was just at this Halifax summit. She does it low key, so people think that she's nice and innocent, and they don't think that they have as big a problem with her as they do with Chuck Schumer. But there is not, there's not a bit of light between the two of them when it comes to policy. And in some ways, she may be more deeply ensconced, if you can imagine, than he is. Now, some people think she's not going to run again. I have to say, she didn't look very well when I saw her, even though I think she's a year younger than I am, actually. Um, but she looked horrible. I mean, health wise. So that would be interesting too if she doesn't end up running. I mean, look, the U.S. Senate from the state of New York, there's been certain precedents. Bobby Kennedy, for example, um, where you're able to play a certain leadership role. And I think that's what's really important. A role actually for a positive program. What should the United States be doing? Should we have a Pecora commission and put a bunch of these Wall Street guys in jail? Should we work with China to eradicate poverty and build infrastructure all over the planet? Should we have water management so people stop drowning in floods and having all of our crops dry up? Should we make sure every single child on the planet has access to clean drinking water? The US Senate ought to be dealing with matters like this. The American people, I don't know of anyone, at least not any of my friends, who thinks that the mission of the United States is to run around the world destroying other countries. It's not why we were founded. We were founded against the British Empire. So why don't we get our identity back? I think we need a voice for that. And New York is a very important state. It was our first capital. George Washington was sworn in New York. So it's a good place to take up the fight.
All right. Well, with that, maybe we can get folks that are watching this join us singing in Dona Nobis. What do you think?
Yeah, good. Let's do it because it'll be really rough. And that way they won't have to feel inhibited.
All right. So here we go. You ready?
Yeah, you pick the key.
Let's see. How about Dona
No, that's
Nobis? Is that too low? You pick a key.
Is that okay for you?
I'll find something.
Okay, let's do that.
You start.
Oh, no, please, Pacem, Pacem. Oh, no, please, Pacem.
Go.
I have no idea what that sounded like to the audience, but
Well, we had some fun tonight anyway, Diane, and all the best to you. Folks, support Diane for Senate and stick with Schiller Institute and LaRouche Organization for the latest in political and foreign service and, foreign affairs, all kinds of interesting stuff. Harley Schlanger every morning at 9 a.m. There's a great wealth of material. Diane, Sare, thanks again. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. And give us peace.
yes, thank you.
Good night, everybody.